Chapter 10, the whole island was blowing up. On the night after the Noro raid, as he lay in a tent in Fonafuti's Coconut Grove, Louis woke to a forlorn droning. It was a small plane crossing back and forth overhead. Thinking it was a crew lost in the clouds, he lay listening, hoping they'd find home. Eventually, the sound faded away. Before Louis could fall back to sleep, he heard the growl of heavy aircraft engines. Then, from the atoll's north end, came a sudden boom, then another and another, each one louder. There was a siren and distant gunfire. Then a Marine ran by screaming, "Air raid!" The droning hadn't been a lost American crew, it was probably a scout plane leading Japanese bombers. Funafuti was under attack. The airmen, Louis and Phil among them, jammed on their boots, bolted from their tents, and stopped, some spinning in panic. They couldn't see any bomb shelters. The explosions were getting louder and closer. The ground shook. Men ran for any cover they could find. Pilot DC and several other men plowed into a pit around a coconut sapling. Herman Skierce, DZ's radio men, leapt into a trench next to a truck, joining 5 crewmates. Pilot Jesse Stay jumped into another hole nearby. 3 men crawled under the truck. Another ran into a garbage pit. One man ran right into the ocean, even though he didn't know how to swim. Dozens of natives crowded into a large white church. Realizing it would stand out brilliantly, a Marine ran in and ordered the natives out. When they wouldn't move, he drew his sidearm. They scattered. In the infirmary, Pillsbury lay in startled confusion. One moment he was asleep, the next the toll was rocking with explosions. A siren was howling, and people were dragging patients onto stretchers and rushing them out. The Pillsbury was alone. He'd apparently been forgotten. He sat up, frantic. He couldn't stand. Louis and Phil ran through the Coconut Grove. Bombs were overtaking them, making a sound one man likened to a giant's footfalls. Boom, boom, boom. At last, with the bombs so close they could hear them whistling, they dove under a hut built under flood stilts, landing in a heap of men. An instant later, everything was scalding white and splintering noise. The ground heaved, the air whooshed, the hut shuddered. Trees blew apart. A bomb struck the tent where Louis and Phil had been seconds before. Another hit the truck, sending it and the remains of the men under it skimming past Jesse Stay's head. Another bomb landed on a gunner in Skierce's trench. It didn't go off, but sat there hissing. The gunner shouted, "Jesus!" It took them a moment to realize the bomb was actually a fire extinguisher. The bombs moved down the atoll. Each sounded further away. Then the explosion stopped. Louis and the others stayed put, knowing the bombers would return. Matches were struck and cigarettes pinched in trembling fingers. "If we're hit," a man grumbled, "there'll be nothing left of us but gravy." Far away, the bombers turned. The booming began again. Someone running by the infirmary saw Pillsbury, raced in, and carried him into a tiny cement building where the other wounded had been taken. It was pitch dark and so crowded that men had laid on shelves. Pillsbury lay panting, listening to the explosions, feeling claustrophobic, imagining bombs entombing them. The booming was louder and louder, and then it was overhead. Tremendous crashing. The ceiling trembled and cement dust sifted down. Outside, it was hell on earth. Men moaned and screamed, one calling for his mother. Men's eardrums burst. A man died of a heart attack. Another man's arm was severed. Others sobbed, prayed, and lost control of their bowels. Phil had never seen such terror. Louis crouched beside him, seized with fear. Staff Sergeant Frank Rosneck huddled in a trench, wearing nothing but a helmet, untied shoes, and boxers. The bombs sounded like someone pushing a piano down a long ramp before they hit and exploded, he wrote. Big palm trees were shattered and splintered all around us. The ground would rise up in the air when a bomb exploded, and then there was a terrific flash of super bright light. At intervals between a bomb falling, it sounded like church. Voices from nearby slit trenches all chanting the Lord's Prayer together, louder when the bombs hit closer. I thought I have heard some guys crying. You were afraid to look up because you felt your face might be seen from above. On the fourth pass, the Japanese hit the jackpot. bullseyeing a row of parked B-24s that were gassed up with bombs. One exploded and another burst into flames, sending machine gun bullets whizzing everywhere, tracers drawing ribbons in the air. Then the 500-pound bombs of the planes started going off. Finally, silence. Men began stirring hesitantly. As they did, a B-24 blew in a gigantic explosion, accelerated by its 2,300 gallons of fuel and 3,000 pounds of bombs. It sounded, wrote one man, like the whole island was blowing up. With that, it was over. At dawn, men crept from their hiding places. The man who'd run into the ocean waded ashore, having clung to a rock for 3 hours in rising tide. Louis and Phil joined a procession of stunned, shaking men. Funafati was wrecked. A bomb had leveled the church, but thanks to the Marine, no one had been inside. Where Louis and Phil's tent had been, there was only a crater. Another tent lay collapsed. A bomb standing on its nose on top of it. Someone tied the bomb to a hook, dragged it to the beach, and turned sharply, sending the bomb skidding into the ocean. Where the struck B-24s had been, there were giant holes ringed by decapitated coconut trees. One crater was 35 feet deep and 60 feet across. Bits of bomber were everywhere. Landing gear and seats that had seen the sunset from one side of Funafati greeted the sunrise from the other. All that was left of one bomber was a tail, two wingtips, and propellers. An engine sat alone on the runway. The plane it belonged to was nowhere to be found. Louis saw a journalist staring into a crater, crying. Louis walked to him, bracing to see a dead body. Instead, he saw a typewriter, flat as a pool table. The wounded and dead were everywhere. Two mechanics had been caught in the open, were bruised all over from concussive forces of explosions. They were so traumatized they couldn't talk. Men stood in a solemn circle around what was left of the truck. The three men who had been under it were beyond recognition. Louis came upon the body of a native, half his head gone. Phil was unscathed. Louis had only a cut arm. Louis went to the infirmary. Pillsbury lay with his leg hanging in the air, dripping blood on the floor. Cuppernell sat with him, thanking him for shooting down the Zero. Pillsbury's leg, which a doctor described as hamburgered, needed immediate surgery. There was no anesthetic. As Pillsbury gripped the bed and Louis lay over his legs to hold them still, the doctor tissue from Pillsbury's foot, then pulled a long strip of hanging skin over his toe bone stump and sewed it up. Louis walked to Superman, which still sat where it had spun to a halt. The Japanese had missed it, but he couldn't tell by looking at it. Its 594 holes covered it, swarms of bullet holes, shrapnel slashes, cannon fire gashes as large as a man's head, the gaping hole in Pillsbury's turret, and the rudder hole as big as a doorway. Men circled the plane, amazed that Phil had kept it airborne for 5 hours in that condition. Louis ran his fingers along the tears in the plane's skin. Superman had saved him and all but one of his crew. He would think of it as a dear friend. Louis boarded another plane and headed home with Phil, Cuppernell, Mitchell, and Glassman. Pillsbury, Lambert, and Douglas were too badly wounded to rejoin the crew. Brooks was lying in a Funafati cemetery. The crew was broken up forever. They never see Superman again. Back on Hawaii, Louis and Phil sank into depression. With a gutted crew and no plane, they were grounded. Louis ran obsessively, trying to forget Harry Brooks' stricken face. On May 24th, the Superman survivors were transferred to the 42nd Squadron of the 11th Bomb Group. 6 new men replaced the lost crewmen. Don't like the idea a bit, Louis wrote in his diary. Every time they mix up a crew, they have a crack up. The only thing noteworthy about the new men was that the tail gunner, Sergeant Francis McNara, ate practically nothing but the dessert. They called him Mac. B-24 is destined for their squadron began arriving. One Green Hornet worried everyone. Even with an empty bomb bay and all engines roaring, it was just only able to stay airborne. Flying with its tail far below its nose, it was relegated to errands, and mechanics pried parts off of it for other planes. Louis flew in it briefly, called it a craziest plane, and hoped he'd never be in it again. And we will continue chapter 11 at a future date.